Okay, well, thank you very much for this introduction. And thank you, of course, for the organizers of this conference. I thank Ilya very much for having gotten in touch with me. It's the first year that I come here as the chair of the At-Large Advisory Committee, but also the chair of ISOC England, the English chapter of the Internet Society. I'm going to speak to you, well, I might repeat a little bit of what Nigel Higson has just said. I'm going to speak to you about the Internet, ICANN, and the multi-stakeholder model. But I do have to lodge a formal complaint first, which is that whenever you get ICANN people to talk to each other, they run over time. They start talking with each other, they start arguing, they start... It's just terrible, terrible.
Cut it short.
So I'll cut it short, and I'll also not allow any questions at the end from ICANN people, but only questions from people who don't have anything to do with ICANN, but who wish to enter the discussion and to start arguing with ICANN people. We're very good at arguing. Anyway, so the Internet itself, I think most of you would know, it's a technology that was developed in the 1960s. You've got technical specifications thanks to the Internet Engineering Task Force, and that's a multi-stakeholder environment. You've got a system that is a distributed system, so there's no single location that decides who does what. It's a network of networks, and it actually was built as a network of networks by individuals. Many people around the world heard about the Internet in the early 90s, some of them in the late 80s, and said, I'd like to get connected, I'd like to start an internet connection in my country. And in Bulgaria, Daniel Kalchev, who I had the pleasure to meet again yesterday after having corresponded with him in the early 90s when he was starting an internet node in this country. Daniel was really, I could say, one of the fathers of the internet in Bulgaria, without any help from anyone, really, like in many other countries where the internet was built. It runs with a dynamic naming system since the 1980s. You've seen this morning a presentation about the DNS version 1. In fact, prior to the DNS, there was a single file that had all of the hosts on the internet, and it became apparent to the person maintaining the file that not only was it a full-time job, but it was totally impossible to keep up with the growth at which the internet went. So as a result, the DNS was developed so that everyone deals with adding their own hosts in their own little part of the world, and a whole pyramidal structure makes sure that this is then shared using a complex system that we're not going to go into specifically. Multi-stakeholder, we've spoken about multi-stakeholderism all day today, and I thought we'd just quickly brush on that. It's an environment where you basically have governments, businesses, civil society, individual users and the technical community, and indeed any other stakeholder not covered by the above, taking part in the decision process. It's a consultation that takes place. And when I say any other stakeholder, there was a joke at some point on the internet when it said, on the internet, nobody knows that you're a dog. So effectively, it meant that whether you might be human, non-human, you can still take part in the process. And if you're a dog that is able to speak, then, or type rather, because in some cases you'll be in mailing list, then that's perfect. The internet model itself is built around multi-stakeholderism. This is a diagram which the Internet Society developed a short while ago, a couple of years, looking at all of the affiliated organizations that made up this model so as to make it work, so as to have standards, so as to have open standards development, so as to have policy development, etc. We're just going to look at two, for example, on this. The first one, multi-stakeholder standards. You've got the World Wide Web Consortium. You've got the ITU that has developed some standards. You have the Internet Engineering Task Force, which I spoke about just now. And you've got the Internet Architecture Board. Several organizations that work together in order to be able to build standards for the internet so that wherever you connect around the world, you'll be able to connect to the internet without any major problems. You've got the same thing with policy. You've got governments, government regional organizations, multilateral institutions,
The Internet Society also, that is involved through its chapters, through its individual members, through its organizational members, and other policy discussion forums like the Internet Governance Forum, which has just taken place last week in Baku. All of these, all of the policy, it's shared among all of these different actors. And in fact, some people wear more than one hat. In fact, quite a few people wear more than one hat because they're part of one organization that deals with one type of meetings and so on, and another organization that might be looking at the more global level. It's something where you act locally, but you also act globally. So, looking at ICANN is actually a multi-stakeholder model in itself. And this is the sort of diagram which I was really scared someone would show earlier today. Nigel nearly came up with that, only he had a black and white diagram. But that's funny because his diagram was more up to date than mine. There is something that's not up to date, is the ICANN staff. It's grown, there are more staff around than there were when this diagram was made. But the structure of ICANN is essentially the same. It's got a board of directors in the middle, and all of the different supporting organizations, which are spelled as SO, we love acronyms, and then also advisory committees, which are spelled as AC. So if I get rid of the board of directors, which is what many people in ICANN want to do, then we have all of the different SOs and ACs that make up the ICANN multi-stakeholder model. And many of these SOs and ACs are actually multi-stakeholder models themselves. They might not be pure multi-stakeholder models, since they might be missing part of the component. For example, the governments are usually all in the government advisory committee, so they would not be part of the other multi-stakeholder models that you have within the ICANN structure. But you have the address supporting organization that deals with the IP addresses, the GNSO, the generic name supporting organization, and we have the previous chair of the GNSO sitting among us. We have, I don't know why I'm doing this, but okay, anyway. It's only now that we start being on speaking terms, but never mind. Then the country code operators that are in the CCNSO, so .bg would be firmly in the CCNSO, and the internet users in at large, and that's really, I would guess, pretty much every one of you here in the room. And then other advisory committees which are more technical in nature, which deal with the root server, the IETF, Internet Engineering Task Force, etc., and the governments, of course. So let's go to at large, which is the committee that I'm chairing. And at large is a community of internet users who participate in the policy development work of ICANN. It might sound like something that is quite masochistic to do, because why would one want to argue all day and stay in rooms that are close to the outside world, spend a whole week in that room, and actually travel home the day after you've spent the week in the room, wherever it is around the world. But that's what we do. It's made up of at-large structures. There are 140 of them around the world. In fact, I think there's more now, 143 or 44. We've got 6 or 7 pending. And these at-large structures are effectively all sorts of organizations that are interested in the internet and that have members, individual end users that are interested in bringing their input to the ICANN processes. So they can be Internet Society chapters, and in fact the Bulgarian chapter of the Internet Society, which is chaired by Veni, is an at-large structure. So you could bring input via the Bulgarian chapter, but there are also other organizations that are not ISOC chapters, but that could be senior citizens, computing organizations, or some organizations that bring computing to deprived communities. And these at-large structures are spread throughout the world. Most of the ALAC work is actually centered around issuing comments. So it's a little bit like, let's say you have a neighbor that looks at the work that you do in your garden. You plant and you paint your house, and your neighbor comes over and says, "Oh, wait a second here. I'm not quite sure you're doing this correctly. We have a comment about this, and you know, I think you should paint your house in gray, not in white." And we basically comment on everything and anything that is ICANN related. So it can be something happening in the GNSO, something in the CCNSO, it could be something happening on the board, at board level, it could be something happening at staff level, it could be comments on the speech by the new CEO. We really have a wide mandate to be able to comment on things and of course influence the policy process through our comments. The comments are also, one of the things that we have to do is to respond to public comment requests from ICANN. When a new policy gets implemented or is proposed, it then goes through a public comment for a certain amount of time where everybody, including people that are not part of ICANN, can actually go onto the forum and comment on it. And those will be taken into account when the final policy is drafted. At Large has actually got a system by which we can channel comments from a wider number of people, find consensus on it, and put real weight to the comments that we bring in the public comment process. One other thing that we do is to take part in cross-community working groups. There have been a lot of discussions in ICANN that each part of ICANN works in a silo. So you might have a discussion taking place in this room, and next door there's the same discussion taking place with other people. And the two rooms don't talk to each other. So in response to this, a number of cross-community working groups are being created from time to time so as to, at the beginning, have the discussions take place with everyone involved, rather than one group talking about one thing and reaching one conclusion, and the other group reaching a completely different decision. Back to At Large. Now, we're divided in 5 regions. Africa, Asia Pacific, Europe, Latin America, and North America. And each region is headed by an organization called a Regional At Large Organization, RALO for short. In order to make things even more complicated, we just take a couple of letters for each one of the regions, and therefore we end up with Europe as EURALO, and Latin America and Caribbean as LAC-RALO, and North America as NARALO, etc., etc. I think you get the point. Each one of these regions is able to select 2 people to go on the At-Large Advisory Committee. And that's one of the big questions. Even Stefan has recently asked me after so many years, what is the difference between ALAC and At-Large? Well, the ALAC is the 15-member At-Large Advisory Committee, 2 people from each region selected by each RALO, and 1 person selected by the Nominating Committee, which is a semi-independent part of ICANN, which Stefan happens to be on now. So it's one of these things. And thankfully, this 15-member committee is then able to channel and vote on every single statement that comes out of At Large. There's also 1 board member that we have been allocated, and they occupy seat number 15. I don't know why they number the seats, but there you go. And that person is on the ICANN board, is not able to relay what we say, because effectively the people on the ICANN board have a responsibility towards ICANN. But he certainly passes by our room quite a lot, and we speak to him, and he's well aware of what happens in our community. The bottom up, and a bottom up. What is bottom up? Well, it's where you have the information starting from the bottom of the pyramid, so the at-large structures, the edges of the internet, the people who are in the streets and who are, in my view, the most important people out there, the users. The internet users. The internet is built for the users. It was built by users for users. Of course, as users built it, they became internet service providers, but the primary thing was their internet users. Those users in at-large structures, so we're looking at the green boxes at the bottom, channel their input into the regional at-large organizations that they relate to geographically. Those regional at-large organizations channel their input into the at-large advisory committee. And the at-large advisory committee then puts it straight into the ICANN processes, whether they're a public comment process or whether we write directly to the CEO or the chairman of the board and tell them this is not right, this needs to be changed, or we don't agree. An example of an at-large structure input, and I'll go quickly through this. It's got several levels of safeguards, because the thing that you want to avoid in a community of users is that the people who are loud get listened to all the time, But the people who might culturally not be used to saying much or wishing to stick their head out and say something, those people have to be listened to as well. Otherwise, you'll always just get the same people who run the show, and the rest will just be sitting behind and thinking, well, I'm too scared to say anything. So when a public comment period is announced by ICANN, you have two discussions taking place in parallel. One in the regional at-large organizations, and the second one on the at-large advisory committee itself. Through a process called consensus, so if there is a convergence in the discussion, then at that point there's a decision that is usually made by the either the RELO or the ELAC that a statement needs to be written. Someone holds the pen. You always need a pen holder. You can't just have everyone holding the pen. So someone holds the pen based on the discussions that we've had, and this then gets drafted into a first statement. That is then proposed for everyone in at large, so all of our members to be able to comment on, and sometimes people comment positively, sometimes people comment very negatively. I'd like to see positive comments because I'd like to see a statement at the end. If we only have negative comments, then it shows that there is no consensus, and we would probably end up with no statement being drafted at that point. A second statement is then drafted, sometimes even a third. This whole process has to take 21 days. We try and do a little bit more from time to time and pull a little bit more, but most of the time we're only given 21 days to go ahead with this. Thankfully, the internet is very fast. Thankfully, most of our members don't sleep. So, you know, they're there, they're excited, they want to do something, and thankfully we do get statements drafted pretty fast. And at the end, just to make sure that it is fully supported by everyone, the at-large advisory committee, the 15-member committee, votes on the statement. And if some have reservations about the statement, they would vote against it or they would abstain. And they have the ability to actually say why they vote against it and abstain. The reason why I'm telling you this process is because actually this is what brings our legitimacy. If we just had one person writing a statement and filing it, it would not be an inclusive bottom-up process. And so we have to make sure that the process is used so that everyone can have a voice and can have the multi-equal stakeholder voice. Goodness, I hate that term. Sorry, I don't like that term, multi-equal. It's nice, but it just doesn't sound good. Finally, I'll speak also to you quickly about the GAC, the Government Advisory Committee, which is another part of ICANN, just to let you know that the governments are also involved. They are also part of ICANN, and they bring their input in their own processes. It's a little bit more opaque because governments don't like to show exactly how they reach a decision, but they reach decisions, sometimes raising an eyebrow or two. They are growing. They have 120 representatives now, and in Toronto, the last ICANN meeting that took place, they had a high-level meeting with high-level people that came, so senior officials that came and that learned about the ICANN model. And I think it's really important that more people learn, and especially governments, learn about how ICANN works. Because as seen from the outside, it's like a big black box. And you don't quite know what's going on, and very few people know that actually the doors are open to take part in ICANN. Yes, it might be a very difficult learning curve due to the technicalities of it and the amount of time that you have to take to learn about it and then proceed forward. But as you can see from the number of people who have appeared today and are part of ICANN or have been serving ICANN in the past, it's not something that is undoable. You might have to forget about your life, your wife, your dog, your kids, and everything else. But bearing in mind, you could probably juggle this, and I see a number of people shaking their heads here. They're still alive. They're still alive. They're still doing well. And really, it's very important, actually, joking aside, that we actually get as many people involved as possible to spread the load of work, because there's a lot of work, but also to spread the word, to tell others out there that the multi-stakeholder model actually works. Opposed to this, there's a model called multilateralism, which Nigel Hickson has alluded to a little bit earlier. Now, there you don't have a cross-community discussion. Maybe you have governments speaking to governments, Civil society speaking to civil society, businesses speaking to businesses, and governments occasionally listening and saying, well, okay, we'll take your point of view, but then we'll make the decisions ourselves. They may ask for advice, they may not ask for advice, depending. They may invite input from businesses, they may not. It really is up to them. And that's where we have a problem, because you don't have that input from the actual users themselves. So why, in my view, is multi-stakeholder better? Well, first, there is an early engagement of all actors. You, businesses, civil society, governments, everyone who is involved, the technical community, everyone involved in making the decisions together. And that actually helps in identifying potential problems a lot earlier, rather than devising a law and then having people outside in the street and demonstrating and saying, this is not at all what I voted for. And then also by engaging everyone in the process to build and to make decisions, the actual decisions are more legitimate. There is this concept of legitimacy which is really enhanced. And we are seeing this when it relates to the internet, that as soon as something does not involve a multi-stakeholder process, the decisions appear to be coming from another planet, and it's more of an invasion rather than a consensus-building process. The difficulty with multi-stakeholder, of course, is that you need to reach consensus. If there are several points of view that people are not willing to move from, you're effectively at a stalemate. The second problem is there's also a tendency of being theoretical. For any of you that have gone to the Internet Governance Forum, you might have found that some of the sessions are speaking about the freedom of speech worldwide and rights of children and rights of everyone to be able to speak the same with the same force. And the theoretical right that everyone can control the internet. And that somehow in the real world is not. Let's face it, governments are sovereign. They can run whatever they want to do in their own country. Businesses are businesses. They need to make money as well. You need to keep your feet on the ground. And sometimes you need to look at practical matters rather than just looking at the theory of it all. The third main problem is the funding of stakeholders. Not all stakeholders are equal, because when you actually meet face to face, not only are you able to take part in the discussion in a room like here, but you're also able to take part in discussing things around coffee, around the beer tonight, around the corridors. And that gives an advantage to the people who are based locally. The problem is that it costs money to be based locally, to travel around the world, etc. And so those stakeholders who have a financial interest or a political interest, governments, are able to allocate money to be able to do this because it is in their core business. But users themselves who have no support as such, users have a much harder time in being able to be there face to face. Yes, there is remote participation, of course, but it's called remote participation. You're remote there. I mean, you basically are striving to listen to the talk that is going on, and you put your hand up on the computer, and nobody listens to you or watches you. And when you actually speak, and your voice appears really crinkly on the speakers, everyone goes, "Can we just have the next question, please? Because I can't hear that person." Technical problems, many other problems. The Earth is round. That's another huge problem. There's always nighttime somewhere in the world. There's always daytime somewhere in the world. I mean, for some people it's actually worse to take part in the day than the night because they have a job. They can't tell their employer, "I'm sorry, I'm going to deal with internet governance for the next 3 hours. I'm not going to do the report that I need to do for lunchtime. You'll have to find someone else." You're not going to keep your job if that happens. It's very hard to be able to juggle things. And then finally, what we have is this clash that's about to take place over at the World Conference on International Telecommunications. And I thought I'd take this little, well, I copied it from the net. It's used without permission, but I'm sure I'm not using it for commercial purposes. It's effectively what might happen in Dubai. I'm not sure who is who in there. It looks as though one party is
Well, actually, no. Let's not engage on this. I'll let you choose. I guess you're the users, so you're the ones who can choose which side you're on. But hoping that it doesn't come down to this, the WCIT is going to see a clash between multi-stakeholderism and multilateralism. And I do really hope that we can find a middle-of-the-road solution. Because at the moment, just the question marks that are raised on the internet and on the future of the internet are very large. I'll be speaking a bit more about the WCIT process tomorrow. I hope you'll be there. But for the time being, I just have to thank you very much. And we can take questions as well if we have time.
I think we have time just for one question. Unfortunately, so...
Priority to non-ICANN people.
Speechless.
No questions. Goodness, speechless. Did I speak too fast? Anybody ready to join the multi-stakeholder process and put their voice? Okay. I'll let you think about it. Okay, ICANN people if you wish to.
Now you're getting desperate.
Well, you know, I'm sure that I can see you all moving in your seats going, please, 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 I need to ask a question. So, I might have answered all questions in advance, I'm not sure. Oh, Stefan, here we go.
I know that I don't want to disappoint anyone by not asking a question. No, it's more of a comment just to say that I think ALAC has come on heaps and bounds since you've been chairing it for the last couple of years, has it been? And you've really done an outstanding job of doing presentations like this which help understand. I think, you know, the point that you're making about the need for users to engage and to understand the process is a very valid one, because I think most people still don't understand the structures that you've shown, both for ALAC and other SOs or ACs are complex. They're difficult to understand if you're not from that world. And as we saw, that the ALAC structure itself, going from the ALS to the RAILO to the council itself, or the committee, is a complex structure in itself to understand. So you know, I think it's up to us all to work on making it simpler for everyone. You know, people that when you come here and you see people not understanding how they can join, it's up to us to make sure that it's easier for them to join.
Yes, thank you, Stefan. Totally agree with you. And it's funny, when I speak with people back home and actually in many meetings, the first question I ask is, how do you think that the internet actually works? How do you think this is all working together? The fact you can press a button and you've got your Google and you've got Facebook and you've got Gmail and you can send and receive emails. How do you think this all works? And they all say, I don't know, I've never even asked myself the question. So there is no miracle. There are people behind it all that make it work, and there are a lot of volunteers behind it all that make it work. And it's important, because if we don't volunteer to make it work, then it will work differently, or in fact it might not work at all, depending on the plans of those that don't like the internet or that think that the internet is a threat to their model. So you have to take action and make sure that you do help. And even, it was a joke, by the way, giving your life away. Okay, I've given mine, but you know, there are plenty of people involved who are just spending their 1 hour a month, and you know, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you.